Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jill Weiss, and I'm the chair of the Water Allocation Commission. Call the meeting to order. At this point, first I'd like to remind, and we have confirmed that we have a quorum of the committee members. I would like to remind everyone of the requirements of the North Carolina State Ethics Act and ask if any member has a conflict with anything coming before the committee this morning. Okay, seeing none, we will move to approval of the draft minutes from our November 8th, 2023 meeting. If everyone has had a chance to review them, I will ask for a motion to approve. Are there corrections?
I was not a member. I don't know how many of us were.
Well, I've just confirmed with council that even if you weren't a member in November, but you are a member now, it is perfectly appropriate for you to move and vote on these minutes.
I will move.
Thank you, Commissioner Tweedy. Any other?
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Dugan, Vice Chair Dugan. All right, then, without objection, the minutes are approved. We don't have any action items this morning, but we do have two important information items, and the first one of those is we're continuing with our overview of the Water Supply Planning Grant Program, which is the primary area of DEQ that this commission will work, or committee will work with. So I'm going to call on Linwood Peel at this time. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Weiss and Commission members. Good morning.
Sorry.
Has David get my presentation ready? Okay. I'm here today to give an overview of the Water Supply Planning Branch Program, in which I oversee. And I'll jump right into it. Today I'm going to cover the Water Supply Planning Program, which is the foundation of our water use data. It's the local water supply plans and the water withdrawal and transfer registration. Then I'm going to do a brief overview of the Drought Management Advisory Council. I'm not going to go into too much depth there because Klaus has a really good presentation to share with you. And then an overview of the Jordan Lake Water Allocation, Supply Allocation, and then the Eno River Voluntary Capacity Use, a program that also the EMC established, and the interbasin transfer. I'm going to very high level, since Harold gave a really good presentation in November, a primary there. First, starting with the Water Supply Planning Program. It was enacted in 1989 due to the mid-'80s drought. If some of you can remember, the Triangle was really hit by the mid-'80s drought. And the General Assembly saw in their wisdom that we needed to have a program. And the program mission is to ensure the availability of adequate supplies of water to protect public health and support economic growth in North Carolina. And really a comprehensive water supply planning program needs to really understand the available resources and the demands being placed on those resources. And one of the things when I do give an overview of the water supply planning program, many water users are really confused that we do not have a state water use permitting program like most of the states east of the Mississippi. There's only two that don't have a statewide program, and that's Alabama and North Carolina. But we do have a statewide water use registration, which is the difference that they just use the water and then tell us how much they use, and they don't have to get a permit to get it. And our foundation there is the local water supply plan and the water withdrawal registration program. Okay, starting first with the local water supply planning program. It was enacted in 1989, and the first plans was due in 1992. And this requires the units of local government, all units of local governments and large community water systems with more than 1,000 connections, which basically 1,000 meters or 3,000 people are required to do it. And we roughly have 550 some systems that are required every year to do annual reporting. And these plans are reviewed by us and have to be approved and adopted by the local government. And the local supply plan simply, in a layman's way, it's an assessment of the water system's current and future water demands and how and their ability to meet those demands in the future. And our plans look out 50 years, and it's in 10 years increments in their projections. And also part of the local supply plan statute is a requirement for a water shortage response plan. And this is a plan in times when water is limited due to a drought or even emergency contamination and so forth, how they can continue to provide water to their essential customers. And also part of the local supply plan is water efficiency plan. And that plan is how water systems are going to look at residential water use and how they're going to reduce it over time through many different demand management conservation strategies, retrofits and so forth. And the last part is surface water transfer worksheets for those systems that have surface water that transfer from one subbasin to another subbasin. This is a lot on this slide. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'm going to give you an idea of what the plan components is. Some of the plans are pretty comprehensive, but the main requirement of the electronic program for systems to do is the system information, distribution data, maintenance, conservation plan. The reason we collect this data is to help them provide technical assistance to water systems in water loss, water loss reduction, water efficiency, those type things. And the program itself provides a lot of data to help other agencies, such as North Carolina Rural Water. They provide a lot of technical assistance to systems using this data as well. Then water use data, we look at the service area, the use type, residential, commercial, industrial, institutional water use, sales to other systems. Then we look at the source of their source. Some systems have, groundwater, surface water, and purchased water. And we also have the surface water tables within that portion of the plan. Then wastewater information, what comes in goes out, and that provides us that information. And if they discharge or had interconnection of wastewater to another system. And the last part is probably the most important, is the system planning component. We look down 50 years, 10-year increments, and look at the future supply, future sales, future purchase, and also if a system is at over 80% of their supply, what we do, we work with them to develop a plan so they don't go beyond 80% to 100% or run out of water. So part of the plan is what they're planning to do, and as a whole, we look at all the systems to make sure people are not saying they're going to use the same source of water. Next is the water withdrawal registration. It was enacted in 1991 due to the same mid-80s drought, and these are registered water users they're required to report annually, just like the local water supply plan systems. But this is all the systems other than the local water supply plan. These are all, not other than the units of local governments and large community water systems. And the requirement there for reporting is if you're non-agricultural water users and you use over 100,000 gallons a day of surface or groundwater any given day, you have to register. In agriculture, their threshold is 1 million gallons of surface water or groundwater any given day. And this is the same kind of breakdown of the water withdrawal and transfer registration. And to give you an idea, it's about a little bit less than 1,400 facilities provide data annually to us in this program. But it's just the facility information, withdrawal information, the discharge information, and interbasin transfer if they surface water will transfer between subbasins. And there's not very many in the water withdrawal registration that do that, but we do have a few. Next, high-level drought management advisory council. This was the actual statute 143.355.1 was enacted in 2003. However, we had an ad hoc council called the Drought Monitoring Council that was established in the early 90s, 1992. And the purpose of this program is to coordinate drought monitoring, assessments, and response activities between state and federal agencies, public water systems, and all types of water users. And as you can see, the statute requires the picture to the bottom right of the symbols represents all of the agencies that are required in statute to be a part of the council. And I'll let Klaus get in more detail about that. But they do provide updates to the U.S. Drought Monitor every week based on the weekly technical drought advisories team. Next, the Jordan Lake water supply allocation is another one that comes to the EMC, and this was enacted in 1967, and the EMC is authorized to allocate water supply storage held in Jordan Lake to different local governments based on their needs through our investigation. And the EMC is authorized excuse me, to reassign or transfer interest in water supply storage held by local governments, once we do an investigation and that's the case. Yes, this is a diagram to kind of give you an idea, excuse me, of the water supply pool and what we call the water quality pool. The water supply pool is about it's 45,800 acre feet, which is about 15 billion gallons. And in calculation, the way we look at that, it's approximately 100 million gallons a day yield. And currently, the allocation amount of Jordan Lake EMC have allocated is about approximately 91%. And as you can see, the water supply pool is less than half the size of the water quality pool. Excuse me, jump 2 slides. Okay, the next program is the Eno River Voluntary Capacity Use Area. And the EMC directed the department in the in the mid-'80s to based on a concern that there was low flow in the Eno River and that supplies and was not meeting the demands of the systems in that area. Hillsborough, Orange Alamance, and Piedmont Minerals was the main water users at that time. So during that time, there were several in-stream flow studies performed by DWR. And of course, during that time, they found out that during low flow periods, the water demand exceeded the available supply. And based on the growth of Hillsborough and Orange County area, that the EMC had to immediately do something to avoid more severe water supply problems. And of course, to preserve the water quality and the habitat in the Eno River, we had established several different things. One was based on the management plan. It was new water supply sources being developed at that time, and also it was a corporation of conservation needed to implement by all water users. And at the time, the EMC created a voluntary capacity use area and a water management plan in itself. And that water management plan creates stages of where Lake Orange, you get a certain level and it flows in the Eno River, where each customer, Hillsborough, Orange Alamance, and Piedmont Minerals, would have to comply with certain water use or withdrawals from the Eno at that time. And they also had to get secondary sources or complementary sources if there was a part of the program. And Lake Orange County engineer was the facilitator of the management plan, but DWR oversaw the compliance and approved the plan, and they report to us monthly of their water use. And this program has been in place now over 30 years. And last is the interbasin transfer, and just high level, it was enacted in 1991, so it just passed its 30-year anniversary, and it required IBT certificate from the EMC for surface water transfers greater than 2 million gallons a day between river basins. And as you can see, the map itself defined the 18 major river basins in colors, and it's subdivided 38 in red. And Harold, provide a presentation in November, so I'll stop there. And this is my brief overview, and if there's any questions about the programs that we bring to the EMC time to time.
And please, we do have several new members to the committee, so feel free to engage Mr. Peel. And also, I didn't explain your position in the branch, so if you would sort of like to introduce yourself in that regard, and perhaps any of your folks who are here with you today.
Okay, great. Again, my name is Leonard Peel, and I supervise the water supply planning branch, and that's the branch that does the water quantity for the Division of Water Resources. And yes, I do have two of my staff here. Harold Brady, he's our Water Supply Development Coordinator. He got a lot of titles. He's our interim IBT coordinator until we fill that position. And then we have Klaus Alberton who's coming next, and he's one of our senior engineers and water resource engineer, and he's kind of the jack of all trades, but he is the chair of the Drought Management Advisory Council for North Carolina.
Are there any questions for Mr. Peel? Yes, Commissioner Deerhead.
Thank you. Could you tell us about the Jordan Lake sediment storage? How often is that monitored? Is that an allocated amount, or is that a monitored, ever changing? Is it growing, the amount of sediment in the lake?
Yes, the answer to that, yes, but how often it's monitored, I'm not sure. That I would have to talk with the Corps of Engineers about that. I know they estimated that at the time the reservoir was built. I'm not sure how often they have done a study of how much sediment does get into the lake, but it has to. Stormwater runoff carries sediment. So to answer your question, I can get back with you with an exact answer.
And Mr. Peel, just a little bit about Jordan Lake is that that is a Corps of Engineers, so a federally managed reservoir, but with very important ties with the state. So that might be important to sort of sort that out, how your branch's role in dealing with the allocation versus the federal government's role in maintaining the levels.
Yes, great point, Chair. The state was allocated the water itself, the water supply pool to allocate to units of local governments through the EMC. The Corps of Engineers, they actually maintain the lake itself, and of course in the process they actually charged the state, or state paid for the water allocation itself, the water quantity portion of it, but they do the maintenance and we pay them, and so the units of local governments pay us back to pay the Corps. So it's two different distinct.
And the reason I'm interested in sediment is that modelers for Division of Water Resources, the contracted modelers, that we're seeing that sediment is playing a role in nutrient management in the lake. And so there is this connection, and I think it's important to follow the status of sediment storage and how it's changing, if at all.
Absolutely.
From a water quality perspective. I don't know whether Ms. Higgins wants to comment on that or not.
Sound like it'll be a good presentation for a future meeting to look into not only Jordan Lake, but look into all the core projects and the big projects in general.
Thank you.
Because it can reduce long-term water quantity.
Yes.
Yeah, and I hate to bring it up, but I will, because I think we got 3 brand new members on this committee, so I just want to reiterate a long time working with him and his team. But one of the most relevant parts about what they do, he mentioned there's over 450 systems that he tracks, plus all the agricultural withdrawals and the groundwater withdrawals. Whenever a unit of local government needs a new water plant built, a new wastewater plant built, or new industries come to town, they come and get their numbers. So the numbers he talks about that he tracks, that is the resource. And so if there's ever on the front end of the planning phase or design phase of any of these projects, or even a new industry coming to town, they're relying on his data. And so that's how important that work that he does do. I like to call this committee, I've always called it the Water Quantity Committee, not the Water Allocation, because I think we've pigeonholed it over the years to just do IBT certificates and different allocations. But it really is the one that people expect. Will there be, ignore water quality for a minute, but will we have water to drink? And will that water be in the banks of the river? Or are we gonna have to have drought problems when it's low or flooding when it's high? Some of those flooding and resilience things, we've kind of spread those across different agencies too, but they're still part of that. And I think we're missing a lot, and formerly when I was chair, this was our strategic committee. A lot of the other committees were in rulemaking. But if we want to talk about resilience, drought management, climate change, water, just basic water quantity stuff, that's what these guys do, and that's what this committee can do to be that forward-looking group to do that. And so I just want to say, as the chair, and something I believe in, is the work they do. And I have seen the usefulness of it, and I've seen the fight about it. If they're not doing their job, you know, the ramification. It is true though, right? When these different jurisdictions start fighting, it's usually because they need that numbers that he's got. So I just want to say the importance of what they're doing and the importance of this committee as y'all look forward. So.
Yes.
I wonder if does the EMC have a role in reviewing or approving the local water supply plan?
No, that's delegated to the director
Okay.
and his staff. But that's the foundation, as JD said, the foundation of a lot of work we do.
Yes, I guess it's just one more comment, maybe more for new members. I know your presentation mentioned the registration of large water withdrawals, but I believe it's still the case that North Carolina is something of an outlier in not having any sort of permit requirement even for major water withdrawals. So there's a registration, but not an actual permit review, which means we're missing one tool for managing some of those allocation issues, which is one of the reasons that interbasin transfers become so fraught, because they are really the only tool available to look at those competing needs, desires, future plans with respect to water withdrawals.
Absolutely. And I mentioned it earlier that it's only 2 states east of the Mississippi that don't have statewide permitting program. So we're in good company with Alabama.
Any other questions for, yes, Germany?
Just one other educational moment for the newer members. We do have river basin management plans, as we call them that now. And it's only in recent years that this component of the department has built and incorporated into the basin management plan. It used to be focused only on water quality, but there is a water quantity component now, and Mr. Peel has played an important role in the development of recent basin management plans that have come before the commission.
Well, seeing no more questions at this point, thank you very much, Mr. Beal, and I guess we will hear now from
Thank you.
Mr. Rodriguez.
We're having a little difficulty projecting out on our WebEx. The visual's there, the sound is not, so we'll continue to work on that as we move forward. You can't move forward much right now, I don't think.
Yeah, no, yeah. Good to go? All right. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Klaus Alberton. You mentioned I'm the chair of the Drought Management Advisory Council, and I am in the water planning section. As usual, when we get requested to have a meeting about drought, it starts raining. Well, this time, drought takes a long time to form. It takes a long time to kind of get mitigated. So when we were talking about this in November, we were really starting to look at, some fairly significant drought impacts across the state. So today I'm just going to give an overview of the history of the DMAC. Linwood mentioned it a little bit. And I'm going to talk about the state's monitoring and response actions, how we actually do the drought assessment, and then have some time for questions and answers. Like I mentioned, it's pretty wet right now. A couple months ago, it was really drying out quite a bit. So it's a little bit less critical right now to be talking about the drought. We're not looking at going into extreme or exceptional drought anymore. Things are mitigating quite a bit, but I think it is useful to kind of talk about how we do make the assessment. It's not just, one person saying it looks like it's dry out west. It is a collaboration with a lot of agencies, and it's a pretty involved process. Again, the whole DMAC, the Drought Management Advisory Council, started back in '92 as part of Emergency Management's Emergency Operations Plan. That's where they look at all the sort of hazards the state could be facing, and drought was one of those. So they started pulling together agencies and folks that would have input into that. As a result of the 2002-2003 drought, things got a little bit more refined. Things got put into statute. Again, we had another significant, almost drought of record drought back in 2007, 2008, which prompted more regulation and more focus on how the state actually responds to drought. So in 2002, 2003, the regulations really focus on who was part of the council. And this is definitely, one of the better, I think, legislation that was put in related to drought, because it really said these are the kinds of staff that should be part of the council. And they should have these technical requirements or basis so that we can come up with a good classification each week. The agencies that you see up there are all part of the council. We have a call every Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Doesn't matter if it's dry out, if it's wet out, we're going to have another, call coming Tuesday. But it's really to see where things are headed, where things have been. And the majority of these agencies do call in every week. They provide their insight into their conditions, what they're seeing, what kind of feedback they get. And it really helps come up with a categorization of drought within the state, and it helps the agencies communicate out why we are in different levels of drought in different parts of the state. The 2008 legislation really focused on how we responded to drought. And the biggest thing, at least to me, is it specified the requirements of water shortage response plans for all public water utilities and major commercial water utilities. And the importance of the response plans is it requires each of these utilities to look at, one, where they get their water from, and who has the authority to say, we need to go into conservation. It specifies what the triggers are. The statute actually says they should be numeric triggers, and that helps so it's not a personal decision. It's not the mayor saying, I think we should, we shouldn't. It takes away some of the pressure they might have from different groups within a town or a county. It says, when we hit this trigger, we go into this conservation measure. And then the conservation measures, you know, they can start off with voluntary and then go into different levels of mandatory. And they say, if we're in this level, these are the specific actions that we're going to take. It can start off with alternate day watering, and then go into, you know, much more stringent things as things get worse and worse. But it does help the system specify, this is what we're going to do when we get to this level, and the hope is that it's going to mitigate their demands and help them get through the drought. Now, there's 5 different levels of dryness or drought, and those are specified by the U.S. Drought Monitor. First one is abnormally dry, and then there's 4 levels of drought: moderate, severe, extreme, and exceptional. When we go into D3, which is the extreme drought, water systems are required to report to the state every week how much water they're using, and that is a public-facing dashboard so that the public can see, you know, you're requiring us to go into these conservation measures. How are we doing? Is our water use, you know, coming down? Are we making progress? And then if we go into D4, which is the exceptional drought, the highest level of drought, you know, by this point, the public's been interested, the press has been interested, we're getting calls, because that really is extreme. This is when water systems may be saying, we only have 60 days of water left. You know, and businesses, communities, the public, everybody's been impacted by this point. They see it, they see everything's drying out, they may see stream levels going dry, they may see the reservoirs, you know, dropping significantly. When we go into D4, then the emergency management comes into play. Some of the responsibility goes from DWR up to emergency management. And then we start having state emergency task forces. We'll have, you know, things that are focused on ag, commercial, all these different parts of it that, you know, may be impacted, especially when we get up to exceptional drought. We'll have a task force that is statewide, and obviously, you know, a lot more communication, press releases, and even press conferences. This is actually a picture of Jordan Lake back in November. I think folks remembered it was dry here. Really, the impact was much worse in western North Carolina. They went into drought earlier and kind of continued to miss out on a lot of the rainfall until just the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to talk about how we go through the process every week. This is just a real abbreviated example of it, but just to give everybody an idea of the agencies and the type of data that we do look at. So starting off each week, we look at where we are with it, respective droughts, just so we know where we're starting off with and know what areas, you know, have been impacted so far in case we've, you know, forgotten over a week. And then State Climate Office gives a really great overview of kind of the precipitation that we've seen, starting off with, you know, how much rain have we gotten within the last week. And then just a number of different metrics that they go through. One is, you know, percent of normal. So how do things look over the last month? Are we at normal, below normal? What parts of the state are being impacted? This is, you know, just recently. So recently, the last 30 days, things are wet, but we start looking at, you know, other metrics. So 60-day percent of normal, 90-day percent of normal, really seeing how things are evolving throughout the state. We can look at how far behind different parts of the state are. So not just percent of normal, but, you know, in this case, Out in Cherokee County, it was 6.7, almost 7 inches behind normal over the last 3 months. And then if we are in drought, we start looking at, 4 months, 6 months, just how things have evolved and how bad things are over the longer term. Now, the Weather Service does give a brief update. Getting a little echo now. We don't actually use the forecast for determining what the drought categories are. Per the U.S. Drought Monitor, the cutoff for precipitation and any data that we look at is Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. They put out their map Thursday afternoon, or Thursday at 8 a.m., but, they need some lag time just to see where things stand and then process all the information, all the feedback that they get from the different states. So again, we do get a forecast just so that we know what we might be facing. Are things going to keep getting worse? Are they going to be getting better? But we do not use that forecast when determining what the categories are as of 8 a.m. Tuesday. But they do give what things are going to be looking like next week. What are things going to look like for the quarter? I'll get into it a little bit at the end, but, the big thing right now is we're in an El Nino pattern. And so they've been talking about that since late November. We're in the middle of this drought, extreme drought in some places, but they're saying we've got a strong El Nino coming. We think things are going to get better. So we said, all right, hope so. The sooner the better. Then we get input from the Cocoa Ross. This is a public program. Anybody can set up a Cocoa Ross station and lets the public say, in my backyard, in my neighborhood, this is what we're seeing. And the reports can be, this is how much rain we got this week, this is how much rain we got this month. I was trying to do my gardening and everything was hard as a rock and bone dry. People will give inputs on wildlife they're seeing, whatever they think is relevant to drought. And it really is useful information. We only have so many weather stations, and precipitation tells part of the story, but, it also is like, well, how is that actually being shown, in the ground, in your neighborhood, in, what you're trying to do. Then we get an update from USGS, and this is just one example of the data that they show, but they look at all the gauges across the state and say, where are flows relative to where they historically are for 7-day and 28-day. This is 28 days, so the average flows at all the gauges across the state. You can see back in the middle of November, over 90% of the gauges in the state were below the 25th percentile. So historically, 90% of the gauges, had more flow or were above that 25th percentile flow at that time. And, since then, we've gotten, every week seems like we've gotten a good rain, and so now we're actually at 1% below the 25th percentile. And then the plot also shows the pink line is the 10th percentile. So, that's really getting very low. 90% of the time, those gauges have shown more flow at that given time. And then we even had almost 10% of the stations having the lowest flow for their period of record for that day across the state. And then just looking at things graphically helps us understand, what parts of the state and what regions really are being the most impacted. And then the state, and also to a lesser extent, USGS has a groundwater monitoring network. So obviously rainfall, is seen pretty quickly in stream gauges. You get the rainfall, you get runoff, you get higher stream flow. The groundwater is more of a extended way of looking at how rainfall or the lack of rainfall is impacting conditions. And so the state has a groundwater network and tracks what the levels are compared to that given time of the year and where they should be. And next, for these weekly calls, when we start talking or getting feedback from all the different reservoir operators, Army Corps of Engineers tells us, where their levels are relative to where they want to be. This example, their guide, say for Jordan Lake, was 216. That's where they want to be at this time of year. Last week they were at 219. A month ago they were at 213. So a 6-foot swing. The picture I showed before was, when things were 3 feet down. You really start to see impacts when, you get a couple feet down. So a 6-foot swing in just about a month. Duke Energy reports about all their reservoirs, Cube Hydro, and then finally Tennessee Valley Authority describe what kind of conditions they're seeing at their reservoirs. Then we get an update from the Forest Service. Obviously, drought is a big driver for wildfires. Things were definitely starting to get pretty busy for the Forest Service back in October, November. And so they report what they're seeing, where they are experiencing the worst fires, and then this figure up on the left kind of shows it's the Keach-Barham Drought Index, and it's one of the things that they look at to show kind of where the potential for wildfires may be. Then we get reports from Ag Extension, which really is an important component too. The farmers are the ones that are out there every day. They know what they should be seeing, they know what they hope to be seeing, and they know what they actually are seeing and how that's impacting the crop that is being planted or that is in the ground at that time of year. And then we get an update from all the water systems. Usually this is one of the worst conditions. If a water system is starting to report that they're going into conservation, that means that there's some pretty significant impacts already occurring. But this is a public site, and all the systems can log in, update, if they're in voluntary conservation, mandatory conservation, and what the reasons are. It may be drought. It may just be that's part of their regulation. They have seasonal requirements. So again, this was just a brief overview of some of the metrics that we look at. At the end of the call, we get everybody's recommendations together, kind of talk about what we've heard, and then come up with a recommendation. And this is just an example of what we went through last week. The shaded areas are what the conditions were at the beginning of the period, and then the black lines are what we're planning on recommending to the U.S. Drought Monitor. So you can see, because of the rains last week, we had pretty significant areas that went in the yellow, which was abnormally dry. We're saying those should be normal, and then a lot of areas from Winston-Salem to the west that were in moderate drought, we're saying those really, because of the rain, should just go back into abnormally dry. And then we give our recommendations up to the USDM. Sometimes it takes a little bit of discussion and refinement with the USDM for them to accept our recommendations or to kind of understand why we're recommending something. But then it gets rolled into the national map, and this is just an example of last week's map as part of the U.S. overall map. The other thing that's really come out in the last couple of years is State Climate Office puts out a really great infographic. So we have all these technical folks weighing everything and coming up with our map. State Climate Office takes that map and explains in more basic language why did things change? Or why did things not change? You know, it may be because Western North Carolina got 2 inches of rainfall, and so that helps. Or we're not changing things because Jordan Lake and Falls Lake are still 3 feet below where they should be, and so even though we got an inch of rain, that's not enough to really make a difference. So again, this is a great tool for communicating things to the public and to different news stations and the press. And then NOAA puts out a quarterly forecast. And again, because of El Nino, they actually were showing that most of the state would be coming out of drought in this first quarter. They did show that the western tip would potentially be still in drought, but showing improvement. And that's because, again, that part of the state was in extreme drought, D3. So that's a lot of steps to really come out of drought. And just to kind of explain why, so on the left is showing the El Nino pattern, and they actually are calling this year's El Nino a super El Nino. I don't know how long that term has been around, but the Weather Service is calling it a super El Nino. But I guess just that signal of where the pressure fronts are going to be throughout the winter really are setting up a strong pattern of this jet stream, Pacific jet stream, coming across the southern U.S. and dropping a lot of rain in the southeast. Again, they were predicting this back in November, but there's no guarantees with weather, so we were hoping it was going to come through. But just as an example, a year and a half ago, we were in a La Nina, and that should have been a dry pattern, and really the whole region was getting concerned because we were starting off from the summer already being dry, and they're saying it's going to be an La Nina, and that, you know, was suggesting we were going to have a lot of problems by this spring, and that didn't come to play. Luckily, El Nino has been as strong as they predicted, and obviously just in the last few weeks, we've really seen a lot of that come together. So that is a rapid presentation of DMAC and how we come up with the categories each week. Definitely open for any questions. Yeah.
Questions? Any commission? Yes.
Question, so you review a tremendous amount of data, and then I'm not really sure I understand how those data together inform your decisions about the drought status. Like, is there an actual formula or?
No, there's definitely some subjectivity on the state level and also on the national level. I guess that's a lot of my role, is to listen to all the different agencies on the call and come up with a consensus. And, you know, a lot of times we'll spend 45 minutes looking at data and another half an hour just saying, well, you know, on the 30 days, rainfall looks good, but in the 90 days, it's not so good. So there's some subjectivity and some art to it. But that, again, that's why having all the agencies a part of the call is important, because in the end, they know this is why we ended up at this point. But yeah, it really is weighing out, you know, how does stream flow look? How do reservoir levels look? When did we get the rainfall? You know, sometimes it's like the maps look good, where say 90% of normal looks great, but climate officer is like, well, that's because we got 9.5 inches because of this hurricane in September. We haven't gotten any rain in the last 2 months. So, you know, which way do you go? So again, there's a lot of data, but there is some subjectivity and a lot of discussion that goes.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Eater.
The most severe droughts that you're showing on the maps are in the counties and the river basins that I'm the liaison to, and so I'm particularly interested in those: Clay, Macon, Cherokee, Graham, Jackson, and Swain. we have some of the state's most sensitive ecosystems out there, and with the droughts, there's a great concern for their condition. But I would also ask that Division of Air Quality be involved in this drought management and the line of communication, at least in somehow, because of the fire risks with the Nantahala fires this past summer or this past fall. I got the impression talking with Division of Air Quality that, you know, at one point they're not as much in the loop to anticipate air quality issues with the onset of forest fires in the area, so that they could be more real time in preparing for and responding to air quality points. The other comment is, with the communities and the growing population in that part of the state, the demand for water, when they enter these drought seasons and become in desperate situations for water supply, are these historically flood control reservoirs equipped to be water supply sources for them, the TVA reservoirs? Chatook, Hiwassee, etc. Do they need them for water supply?
I don't believe they do. I'm gonna look at Linwood. I mean, I know, you know, much more for the Army Corps reservoirs, they have, you know, uses that they were designed for. I don't believe that TVA.
Well, of course, Linwood Hill, Water Supply Planning Branch. TVA does have some of their reservoirs used for water supply. Every year we get a request for withdrawal of all the uses. So to answer your question, some of the reservoirs are used for water supply, but some of them are not. They're just hydropower type flow through for, especially the ones that goes into the Mississippi. Most of them are for barge traffic and so forth. But we do have some.
Is there a list? It would be useful to know in Western North Carolina which flood control reservoirs are also water supplies.
Yes, we do have that list.
Okay.
We can provide that list.
Thank you.
Yeah. What's the term, like, for Army Corps, what the allowed uses are, you know, flood control? I know there's a specific term that they use.
Well, I just know that, for instance, Jordan Lake, it was built originally for flood control, but they also have components of water supply, recreation, and so forth. I think I was thinking of a terminology, though.
Yeah, there's a specific term, you know, when the reservoir is built, what the uses are for it. I know Army Corps, it was built for flood control. You know, they have to go through specific steps for it to become, for water supply to actually become an authorized use. I'm not sure what the process for TVA would be.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah, we definitely can look at that, and also, you know, discussing with Air Quality about how to get them more in loop. I would think, you know, they're more interested in kind of the results of the classification each week than input into, you know, what things should look like. But yes, we can definitely talk to them about being part of the.
They just walked in. I was telling them this is a drought management presentation, and in Western North Carolina, the Drought Management Advisory Council, of course, includes forestry, and I asked them if they could keep y'all more in the loop real time to anticipate forest fires and air quality impacts. So I was just putting in a plug for y'all.
I think Commissioner Reardon has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Joe Reardon, I did have a question. I remember seeing some charts that were put together that really highlighted the dependency that North Carolina has on its total water supply on hurricanes and other tropical storms. I didn't see it in your presentation, but can you share a little bit of what those numbers look like? I remember in the 40 or 50% range, maybe that's wrong, but how dependent is North Carolina on its fresh water supply on natural events such as hurricanes and tropical storms and such as that?
Do you have any?
I would be totally guessing, but I have seen that graph. But it changes every year.
I think it would be because when I'm just speaking personally here, but when you have a state as dependent as we are on natural disasters to supplement our water supply, and then the propensity of that to happen or not happen, that's a huge variable. And so in the absence of hurricanes and tropical storms making up a huge percentage of our water supply, then we become even more reliant on those reservoirs for in those times in which the storms don't show up. Now, we've had a lot of rain lately. Is that something you could give us, just look into that and share? I think it would be good for the committee members to know just how dependent we are on these tropical storms and hurricanes to supplement our available water supply. And I think the numbers is higher than 40-some%. So, Chair Solomon, you may remember that, but just something I think would be of interest I'd like to see personally.
Yeah, but I guess keep in mind if things are normal or average, that wouldn't be a big issue. But hurricanes have helped us when things was way below normal.
That's right.
So and I've seen that graph before, and so we'll get that information.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Alberton and Mr. Peel. Before I go to Director Rogers, are there any other questions from the committee for either of these gentlemen? No. Okay. Thank you. Oh,
Forgive
yes.
Mr. Rogers, can I just, Commissioner Deerhake mentioned something, and you can talk about it more in a future meeting, I guess, but talk about your liaison and your river. I call it your program, but it is your program. You created it. But tell everybody what that is for the new members and what we're trying to do with that.
Well, since we have 17 major river basins, and approximately 15 to, sometimes it moves, it's a moving target, how many people are on this commission, about 15 commissioners. I had spoken with Chair Solomon when he was previously chairman about the idea of having each member be a liaison to at least one basin in the state. Sort of an adopt-a-basin concept, and we have followed through with that. We're at a point now where new members need to look at what basins they might find most useful for them to be a liaison. But the whole purpose is that when presentations such as this and river basin management plans come forward, or there are rulemakings or stream classifications that are particular to certain basins before the commission, if there's a commissioner who's already become very familiar with the basin, talk to the stakeholders in the basins, that person can be a good voice for the setting, the issues, any particular details that may not be quite apparent in just looking at what we are delivered in paper, but to get a better understanding and build relations with these basins. I chose the ones in southwestern North Carolina because they're so far away and probably don't receive the amount of communication with the commission that more of the local basins do. Plus, it's just a beautiful part of the state, wonderful ecosystem. So I'd encourage each of you to look at the list of basins. The basin management planning staff, led by Michelle Riquet, has that list of who is assigned to each basin currently, but there are definitely openings, and hopefully you'll volunteer for one of those basins. It doesn't necessarily have to be the one you live in. Thank you for mentioning that, Chair Solomon.
Yes, absolutely. I was not aware that it was a volunteer activity rather than an assignment. So I very much appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you both. All right. I guess now we're ready for Director Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any additional substantive comments, but I do want to thank the committee for listening to the presentations. I think it's always good that we can present the work we do, provide y'all a little more depth and breadth of what work we do in this area, and certainly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we adjourn, I just want to say that if any members have ideas for presentations from the Water Supply Planning Branch, to please feel free to reach out to myself and Commissioner Smith, who's the chair of this committee, and we will be glad to facilitate that. As you saw today, they are very willing to support us and respond to our questions and concerns. So with that, I will ask if we have a motion to adjourn. Oh, I've just been informed by council we do not need a motion, so I will adjourn this committee meeting.
And let me mention to everybody that the Air Quality Committee will start at 10:15.